as a
we'll
lawyer, I'm naturally, you tell me 10, I'll do 15. So just cut me off when it starts going along. Please, yeah. Yeah, exactly. When I get to 10, let me know. Well, it's so good to see you all. I've gotten to know some of you I haven't gotten to meet, but my name's Zach Dembo. I'm running to be your next congressperson. I'm running for the 6th District, which is the seat currently occupied by Andy Barr. But I'm careful to say, not that he's currently representing us, because we all know that man has not been representing us for a long, long time, because he is, as you know, a career politician who's only interested in catering to the White House and advancing his own political ambition. Wasn't planning to go down that road, but as I was just thinking about that commercial. I can't tell you how often, I'm on the phone all day, and so you just hear about this commercial, and I mean, obviously it's absolutely despicable, right? It is just, I can't even begin to say how it represents a backslide. Obviously I'm preaching to the choir in a church here, but you get what I mean. I am from Lexington. I'm a 9th generation Kentuckian. My mom grew up on a small farm in rural Kentucky, dairy and tobacco. She was out there setting tobacco at age 5. I wasn't there, but she tells me it was miserable work, and she also decided that she was going to make a different choice for herself. And so she was the first in our family to go to college. She went to UK. After going through UK, she met my dad, who was from New York. And a New York Jew. I think that was the first Jewish person that my grandparents ever met. But she convinced him to move to Kentucky, and thankfully I got to grow up in Lexington. But because of my mom's experience and her hard work, I never forgot that I was lucky to have that opportunity to go to college, which is why I spent the rest of my career trying to pay that good fortune forward. So I went off to college in Stanford. And then my first job out of college was as an 8th grade English teacher in the Mississippi Delta with Teach for America. I taught students from 12 to 17 years old. I taught students who were above grade level, on grade level, and I'm sad to say, functionally illiterate in 8th grade. And let me tell you all, it made me so angry, and it made me so passionate, and I loved fighting every day to make sure that these students got the education they deserved, because there should never be an 8th grader who can't read, ever, in this country. And obviously I felt that before, but when I got to know Rodney, who's one of the people that I'm thinking of, it just made it even clearer that we need folks to fight for us. We need folks to fight for everyone, and that's where I caught the public service bug. After teaching, I went to law school at Michigan in Ann Arbor, and then commissioned on active duty in the Navy. I was a Navy JAG, which is like a uniform lawyer. I gave legal advice to COs. I gave legal assistance to sailors and Marines, but the thing I liked the most was standing up for sailors and Marines and making sure that their service and their rights were respected. When I left, I went to be a prosecutor at the Civil Rights Division in DC, which used to exist. They used to enforce civil rights laws not that long ago.
Just about a year ago?
Yeah, just about, yeah, funny you should mention it. We'll actually return to that moment in a second. Yeah. So I traveled all over the country prosecuting civil rights crimes. Usually that was law enforcement misconduct, excessive force, but it was also hate crimes. Some of them were in Kentucky, but I was in New Mexico and Idaho and Maryland and all over the country. And once again, I loved standing up for these folks, because usually the victims of these crimes were folks that thought no one was going to believe them. A lot of these victims were inmates, were arrestees, and they thought, the person who did this to me had a badge and a gun, and they're never going to believe this story. And by standing up and fighting for them, I'm pleased to say that we were able to get justice for these folks, and I loved that job. The only reason I left it was to come back to work for someone named Andy Beshear here in Kentucky. When he got elected, he asked me to come back to be his policy advisor. And so I had big plans about what that meant. My first day was March 13th, 2020. On March 17th, 2020, I watched as the governor signed the executive order shutting the state down. And so all my grand plans, as so often happens, went out the window. And instead, it was about how do we keep people safe and businesses open during a once-in-a-generation pandemic. And again, I learned so much from working with the governor and Rocky and so many others on Team Kentucky, and it was an honor. But again, I felt like I was fighting every day for Kentuckians, for my family, for my extended family, and for all my neighbors, and I love to do it. And the only reason I left was to go back to what I thought would be the last job I would ever need, which was being a federal prosecutor here in Lexington. Being a federal prosecutor in your hometown, I think, is the dream job for a public service-minded lawyer, because when it's done right, and it certainly isn't these days, unfortunately, but when it's done right, your only job is to do the right thing every day. Sometimes that is getting folks convicted and getting them a hefty sentence. Sometimes, more importantly, that's dismissing a case or not bringing charges because the evidence doesn't support it. And sometimes it's the middle of someone should be convicted, but they don't deserve a serious sentence and they deserve leniency. I loved only having my mission being to do the right thing every day. And that's why I planned, as so many do in that office, to stay for 20 years and retire as a Fed. But I couldn't have anticipated this administration, right? I mean, I had been at the Civil Rights Division in the first Trump administration, and while I had incredibly serious personal political differences, it never occurred to me as a civil servant that that would ever affect my job, because it didn't. When I was in the Civil Rights Division the first go around, no one ever had any political interference in any of my cases, and I was allowed to seek justice as the law and the evidence suggested. But as we know, what this administration is doing to the Department of Justice is unprecedented, it's corrupt, and it's turning the Department of Justice into the president's political law firm. I'm sure you guys have seen many of these examples, but for me, it was seeing how there was the pressure to dismiss a righteous political corruption case against the former mayor of New York, Eric Adams. Those are really hard to build. All the career prosecutors wanted it to happen, and this administration, even though, by the way, Adams was a Democrat, didn't matter to me, but usually the way they work, you think it would matter to them, but they wanted leverage on the guy, right? And so they wanted to dismiss it. And so 15 career prosecutors either were fired or resigned because they refused to dismiss a righteous case. The other thing that I was incredibly offended by was the Department of Justice opining that somehow it was legal for the president to accept a $300 million jet from a Sharia-controlled monarchy that clearly wants to influence our policies. In the military and at DOJ, I just sit through trainings every year, and they'd say, if you accept more than $20 in gifts from an unauthorized source that might want to influence you, you could get in big trouble. And meanwhile, that same federal government was saying the president could accept a $300 million private jet. The hypocrisy was staggering to me. And so that and a lot of other things led me to make the difficult decision in May of last year of walking away from 11 years of federal service and resigning as a matter of principle. I could not stand by and felt that instead I had to stand up to what the administration was doing. The question was how? How do I keep serving people? How do I keep helping people? And that's why I got in this race. To continue that legacy of public service, to keep fighting for folks as I've done my whole career, whether it's students, whether it's sailors and Marines, whether it's everyone on Team Kentucky, or whether it's crime victims. I wanted to continue that fight, and that's why I got in this race. It's very obvious that right now this country is in crisis. No one knows it more than me, seeing it from the inside and seeing how justice should be done and what's actually happening to the justice system. And we have to have fighters to stand up against it. And that's why, again, I stepped away from a career that I loved and that was very personal to me, and instead took on this challenge. Obviously, the first thing we've got to do is reverse some of these terrible decisions this administration is making, right? And I'm thinking of the Medicaid cuts. That needs to be reversed tomorrow, right? 200,000 Kentuckians at risk of losing their Medicaid. Similarly, rural hospitals, 35 in the state, 6 right here in the district at risk of closing. That's got to be reversed on day one when the Congress flips, which, by the way, it is going to flip. We've also got to think about these tariffs. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the Supreme Court said they were unconstitutional. We all knew that. But man, I don't know, maybe I keep thinking there's going to be the breaking point, and I figured, well, great, the Supreme Court said it. It took all of 2 seconds for this president to say, I don't care about the law or the Supreme Court. I'm still going to impose the tariffs. Part of the reason that he's able to do that is because the body that has the constitutional power to control tariffs, Congress, in Article 1, Section 8, has just decided they're just going to give up their power with the weakest Speaker of the House in the history of the country, ceding his power to the White House. That's got to change, and the way we do that is by flipping Congress. But we've got to do more than that, because I worry that we've gotten to a point where Democrats are just seen as being against things. And we need to be against this administration with all of our voice and all of our efforts, but we got to think about more than that, I think. In any normal election, you'd expect Democrats to take the House back, right? It's always the party that doesn't have the White House that does well in the midterms. So we're going to take the House back, that's normal. If we treat this as politics as usual and decide, great, we got the House back, let's go back to 2024, I think that is a massive mistake and a massive lost opportunity. We have to reshape this party, and we have to reshape the relationship with DC and us. I've never run for office in my life. I am not a career politician, and I'll tell you all, from being just a voter on the outside, I don't feel like DC has had our interests at heart for a long, long time. And there are things that have been allowed to happen from both parties that I think add to that distrust. For example, how is it in 2026 that individual members of Congress are able to trade stocks based on non-public information that we don't have the access to? That's been allowed to be perpetuated by a lot of Republicans, but some Democrats. That should never be happening. There's no possible justification other than people lining their own pockets. Similarly, why is it that there is not a lifetime ban on members of Congress from lobbying? No congressperson should be taking a vote thinking about a job at any point down the line other than serving his or her constituents. Those are easy reforms that we need to be doing and that both parties have stymied and not allowed to happen, and we need to fix. But then beyond that, we have to think about the systemic issues that led to this man being elected again when everyone knew who he was and what he was, right? There are systemic issues where a lot of folks, including my neighbors and friends here in the 6th, felt that the system didn't work, and so they were going to vote for someone who blatantly was saying he was going to burn it down. We have to think about those underlying problems. So, for example, I think our party is best when we do big things, when we do great things. I'm a Democrat because of the New Deal, because of the New Frontier, because of the Great Society, and it's been a long time since we had those sorts of big ideas. Instead, the Democratic people in power tend to be, let's fix the tax code so we make it 2% easier for someone to do something, right? There's a housing crisis, let's make it so there's more of a tax credit. Instead of, why is there not, for example, a Manhattan Project to research the best and cheapest way to increase housing supply? Why is there not a commitment for that? Why are we allowing campaign finance to continue to be the complete mess that it is, that we all know it is, but Democrats and Republicans have not come together and fixed it for a long time, and they're both benefiting from it. I'm sure you guys have questions about specific policies, but I'm just saying the reason that I stepped up and the reason I think we have all these problems is we've had a lot of folks in DC who think their only job is to get elected as many times as possible. And frankly, for some of them, it seems their aspiration is to die in office, which sadly happens. Part of the reason Congress is so close right now is because a couple of Democrats did die in office instead of passing the torch. We have to have new faces, new ideas, and new leadership. And we need people who come from a background of public service and who are interested in nothing more than serving you all. And I can promise you, if I'm lucky enough to be your congressman, I do not view it my job to get reelected. My only job is to serve you all. And if there ever is a point where there's a decision between those two things, if the consequence is losing an election, that seems not a problem for me. I'm not planning on being there for life. There's always going to be a point at which you have to make that decision. I hope I get to make it voluntarily and decide I'm just not going to run again. But if there's a difficult decision to be made, that's why you get sent to DC, is to make those difficult decisions. So I want to fight for you all. I would love to have your support. I'm so grateful for you all showing up. I'm glad from what Craig was saying that there's more interest and more folks coming to this. I am the least important person in the room when it comes to flipping this seat. It is going to be you all's advocacy, you all's interest, you all's passion. I'm glad to see you all here. I hope this stays up through May, and most importantly through November, because we have the best shot to flip this seat in a generation, but it's going to take everyone in this room and everyone you know and everyone they know. I'm quite confident the energy in here tells me you guys have it, but we've got to build a whole team to accomplish this mission. So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions about any matter you want to ask. Yes?
How do you feel about term limits?
Yes, so I am very much in favor of term limits. I need to figure out what the right number is, because on the one hand, I don't think that setting an arbitrary, like 6 years in my mind, for example, does not seem long enough to accomplish something significant. But clearly, 25 years seems too much. One thing I've been toying with, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is maybe like an age limit,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's the bigger concern. But I think it's a big problem, again, that people think their only job is to get reelected, and also that they can be barely coherent, but they'll still be there in the chair. That shouldn't be happening, and maybe that's one way to do it. Not to be all lawyerly, and sorry to be that guy, but I do worry how we get that done constitutionally. But what I would hope would be, as a party, we could just pass our own standards and say, listen, after a certain age, you're not going to be nominated. But I think that's a big solution to the problem that I'm talking about. Thank you. Yes?
What do you think about a mental competency test before you can run for office?
I love that idea. As a matter of fact, there's a friend of mine who's a supporter who texts me about that. He's got a whole cottage industry he's got planned about how we do this. I think it's a good idea. Again, I worry how we can implement it in a legal and constitutional way, but absent that as a policy, yeah, that's the real problem, right? And I frankly,
Some kind of floor there
yeah.
where you have to-
And I mean, frankly, again, obviously, I was a fan of the prior president, but I think his condition is a great example of where our party betrayed us and should have revealed what was going on, and maybe a test like that would have fixed that. Yeah, yes, sir.
Trump's Council of Peace, or whatever he calls it.
It's very Orwellian, right? It's always the opposite of what it actually is.
They're thinking of ways to make Gaza into a business. Can you give us briefly some thoughts, your thoughts on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Go back to 1948.
Oh, that's all. You want me to just solve Middle East peace? So, what I will say is, What I will say is, I'm the only candidate in the race, I think, of Jewish descent. And so Israel is very important to me. And what I want to say is, obviously, I will always stand for Israel's right to exist as a state and as an ally. But what we saw from this government is completely against all of our values and everything we support. And I do not think support for Israel means support for Netanyahu, just as I don't think being a patriotic American means support for this president. And so it is clear that we have to be willing to hold extremists there accountable, just as we hold them accountable and need to hold them accountable here. That's not quite back to 1948, but I don't, obviously I want peace. I hope the 20-point peace plan works. I don't know that it's working in the way, I'm not seeing the sort of actions that you would hope that would be sustainable in terms of peace. I don't think there's any real interest from the administration other than claiming credit for peace, but I hope it holds. I do not really trust this administration to handle these foreign affairs with any sort of responsibility, obviously. And again, the fact that Congress is not taking a more active role, I think, is completely a dereliction of their duty. Yes?
So if elected to Congress,
Yes.
would you vote to send more money to Israel to fund the genocide?
So, would I vote for more money to fund the genocide?
Would you send them money to buy more arms and more equipment to fund the genocide of the Palestinian people?
I'll second that.
Sure. All right, very good. So, obviously, I'm not going to vote for arms that are going to support a genocide.
What I asked.
I understand.
Any arms in general,
Yeah,
because even defensive arms allow them to use offensive arms, right?
yeah. So, I think I'd need to know more, but what I would say is, from what I saw from what this Netanyahu government was doing, I would not be in favor of supporting that government in any way whatsoever. You're asking me to ask about a hypothetical for a government that doesn't exist yet. If it is Netanyahu's government doing what they were doing, I would not be in favor of supporting any of those actions.
If it is an Israeli government of any kind supporting the genocide of Palestinian people, will you vote to give them money?
Of course, if the Israeli government is committing genocide, I
Do you
will not
believe
support
they
it.
Is the
Are-
Israeli government committing genocide?
I don't-
Have they been?
I do not see evidence right now that they're committing genocide.
Wow.
No, because they've already done it.
Right, they're done with it, right?
I'm done.
Like,
I mean, you're in a difficult position because of what you just said about your thing, right? But you talk to any Palestinian
Sure.
and they're, you're in for a 2-hour conversation.
Yeah, I
Because it
understand.
doesn't go with the Netanyahu. It doesn't go with October of a couple of years ago.
Right.
It goes back to 1941, 1921.
Mhm.
It goes back to 1866. It goes back 2,000 years.
It does.
And, you know, I had this in trying to figure out Northern Ireland. And it took how long? 400 years? And maybe we're not there yet. So this is not an easy problem to solve.
It isn't, and I understand that wasn't the answer you wanted, and all I can promise is I'm gonna tell you the answer that I feel and not the answer that you want.
no, I want you to be honest.
Yes,
Yes, I just wanna say that I am Jewish, I'm 100% Jewish,
Yes.
mother, father, grandparents on both sides. I have relatives in Israel, many, and I know they are committing genocide, so I am seconding everything else that people are saying. I don't think being Jewish validates any kind of permission to not think that way.
yeah, and I don't either, and maybe the problem is that maybe I wasn't clear enough that I was not in favor of anything that Netanyahu's government is doing, but being trained in international law and having the UN make these sorts of decisions, when I hear the term genocide, there are very specific definitions that I look for. If you're thinking about things they're doing that are illegal, that violate international law,
Children.
I completely
and
agree.
bombing hospitals.
And if you're asking if that violates international law, I tell you yes every day of the
Does
week.
it violate moral law?
Yes, of course.
Then
Of course
why
it
would
violates
you
moral law.
consider sending them arms, right? I don't wanna hear mealy-mouthed talk about, does it technically classify as a genocide? We've seen the videos, we've heard the stories, we know what is happening.
Yeah, and I
You can
said
be a
that,
proud Jew and represent that ideology and that religion, fine, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But as this lady said, you can be a practicing Jew, 100% committed, and still recognize the horrors that are happening, that are being perpetrated. And we should not be sending that government any funding at all, based on what they've done.
and as I said, if Netanyahu were doing the things he were doing, I would not be in favor of helping him in any way.
Netanyahu is the only person who's done stuff like this. There are plenty of other people in that administration who have committed horrible things against those people.
Previous administrations in Israel.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted your feeling on getting PAC money. Are you taking PAC money?
I'm taking PAC money, I'm not taking corporate PAC money, if that's your question. Like, for example, when I got endorsed by Vote Vets, which is an organization that endorses progressive veterans, they have a PAC and they gave me money. You can see that in my filings. If you're talking about corporate PAC money, I've not taken any corporate PAC money. I don't plan on taking any corporate.
I
Guess I'll have to ask
AIPAC.
everyone, do you take from APAC?
I have not been offered or taken any money from APAC.
Will you take from APAC?
I haven't been offered and don't plan on.
That is
taking
not the
money.
question. The question is, would you accept it? Would you accept money from AIPAC
Yeah.
if and when they offer it?
I won't accept money from
That's a
APAC.
good answer.
Yeah.
I think we need to remain civil and polite.
I think we are remaining civil
Yeah.
and polite.
Yes, sir.
So, what are you gonna do about the poor?
About the poor.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is maybe we should, acknowledge they exist and remember them.
Right.
I think there's a great extent to which we're trying to make them unseen and unheard. A lot of my victims were folks who were only picked up because they didn't have the money to defend themselves, to have a lawyer, to have the normal things that folks have in terms of family support. And so, for example, there's a gentleman who I prosecuted, a guy who tased this gentleman repeatedly. he was in because he couldn't afford child support, which is terrible, and he needs to pay child support, but also he was in prison just because he didn't have money, right? So I think the first thing we gotta think about is, why would we make it harder and harder for people to make ends meet when it's already so hard, right? I mean, it wasn't easy before these Medicaid cuts, it wasn't easy before these tariffs. Why would we keep piling on? So the first thing we gotta do is reverse that. But I think the second thing we gotta think about is, how are we going to make it so that people can get by on a normal education, and how can we make it so that they can get by on a minimum wage? So first thing is, minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009. That's an easy fix. We should have raised that forever ago. It needs to be at least $15, if not $20. That's an easy thing to fix. The other thing we have to do is make housing more available and affordable. And that's where I was getting at earlier, where I was talking about we need better research into materials and ways to build houses cheaper and make them more available. It's insane that housing has become unavailable for almost everyone. The only way I was able to afford a house is because of the VA loan. If I did not have a VA loan, I wouldn't be able to have a home that I could afford to buy. But I think the first and most important thing is just not forget about them. Right now, I don't think this government or this Congress, for that matter, when we're giving tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, has any thought for the bottom 20% of folks who frankly need more help and more attention. And those are the folks that I was fighting for when I was teaching or prosecuting. Yes?
Speaking of helping the poor, will you be a vocal advocate for Medicare for All?
I will be a vocal advocate for the public option. The reason I don't like Medicare for All is because a lot of folks like the healthcare plan that their employer has. I'm not interested in forcing them off of it, but for those who don't like the healthcare plan that their employer has, I want them to have a public option that they can buy into. Yes?
What's to keep the public option from becoming a receptacle for the sick? Because the private insurance industry does not want to insure the sick, and they'll do things to drive people into the public option. So it will need subsidies, in which case the corporate insurance will say, look, it needs subsidies, it's not efficient. So it's really, it doesn't make sense. They're getting 15-20% skimming off the top, money that's not going to healthcare. Why would you not be for the public option? Why would you not be for Medicare for All?
So you're hitting on, I think, another part of the problem, which is the corporate insurance industry, right? And I think right now, the way that we are failing to regulate them when it comes to issue, for example, like pre-approval for things. I'm understanding that some of them are using AI to try to pre-approve things.
Yeah.
That should not
Parasites.
happen.
We don't need them.
What's that?
They're parasites, we don't need them.
I think we need to make sure that they can't be parasitic. I think AI companies, any company, if the government is not regulating it properly, is going to do what this industry is doing. And I think rather than getting rid of and forcing hundreds of millions of Americans off the healthcare that they have, I think we just need to fix these companies so they are not parasites.
I've got traditional Medicare and I love it. Not Medicare Advantage, that's a scam. Traditional Medicare, I love it.
Yeah.
It's taking care of it. Everybody deserves to have that.
Yeah.
So, you've already talked about the DOJ not following the rules and Trump ignoring the courts and such. If you win, but we don't flip it, as a lawyer, what legal ramifications would you take toward solving that, to make someone hold Trump accountable? Because right now, it doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says, there's no punch behind it. So what legal thing could we do to solve that problem?
So you're saying if Kentucky 6 flips but the House doesn't flip,
Yes.
what do I do?
We've got 5 minutes.
Thanks, Greg. So the first thing is, this is a very vain president, right? He watches TV a lot. And one of the things I've been so frustrated by the current elected Democrats and sort of the traditional Democrats is that I don't think they've coalesced around an effective resistance message, and I don't think they've been able to make it in a way that embarrasses him. I think, as you saw, and I only watched the highlights because I admit I couldn't stand watching it all. But as you saw with the State of the Union last night, he loves images and he recognizes the power of those images. I don't think the leaders that we have in Congress recognize that. And he doesn't like to look bad on TV. He watches TV, probably 16 hours a day when he should be working. And so when we've seen things that he thinks make him look bad, he changes it and tries to change the narrative. We see that again and again, but I don't think this party has been good at that. I obviously think it would be much better, and I don't see a world in which we flip the Kentucky 6 and don't flip the House. The question I often get is, what happens if we flip the House but don't flip the Senate? Obviously, don't worry, we're gonna flip the Senate, right? Okay. But if we don't flip the Senate, the House has the power of a subpoena. And I've issued a lot of subpoenas in my day, and there's a lot of investigations that need to be happening. And a subpoena from a House committee does not require the approval of the Senate or the White House. There's a lot of light that could be shed on this that isn't being done right now. Congress just needs to do its job.
That's what most of the is.
Well, those can be enforced, and that's the other problem, but yeah, you're not wrong, and yeah.
Sorry, you had a question.
So there's been a lot of research come out about the security vulnerabilities with like flock safety and the ALPR cameras, and there's just kind of a broader conversation about AI, data centers, copyright violations and things like that. So you as a lawyer and as someone running to represent us, what are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah.
Right, privacy and ALPRs and kind of the whole bag. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, for sure. And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before about government regulation. I feel like AI just kind of has a blank check right now, and that government is not checking them in any way. Government needs to do its job. And right now, for example, you guys probably saw there's a data center they're considering in Mercer County.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions about that in terms of who's backing it, what's it gonna mean for utility rates, what's it gonna do to jobs? Those are questions the government should be making sure are answered, right? When someone puts a data center in and people's electricity rates skyrocket, the government needs to be making sure that it's not just the company making that off of the backs of normal ratepayers. When AI is coming in and we're worried it's gonna take jobs, the government needs to be making sure that there's someone to stand up for those workers and that the company reflects the true cost of what it's doing to society. And so my biggest concern is AI is going so fast, I don't think anyone in government really understands it. I don't think this Congress, this administration is doing anything to check it, as we know, because they're getting tons and tons of money from AI. We just need government to step in and be someone to make sure there's a square deal between a large, very, very rich corporation and the rest of us who have almost no power. Yes?
Les, I do not remember, listened to all the podcasts, now. I don't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
But they were interviewing congressional candidates and asked, one of the questions was, what will you do if you're elected to rein in President Trump, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Impeachment was never brought up. There were all kinds of other options. Why would that not be the first thing a new blue Congress would do, was give articles of impeachment?
Yeah.
Especially if the Senate flips and he can be convicted, what?
Oh, well, for sure. If the Senate flips it and he can be convicted, that's an easy thing.
You would think, but nobody ever, the word impeachment did not come out of any candidate's mouth.
I guess it's,
And they weren't 6th district, it was national, it was a national.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate on the reasons why. I mean, he's obviously been impeached twice. He's continued to commit offenses. There's no debate about that. I think the only question that I would have is if the Senate doesn't flip, he's been impeached so many times and it hasn't done anything. So is it more effective to have the investigations? Is it more effective to issue the subpoenas? But there's no question it's a matter of law.
And can we do J.D. Vance while we're at it?
There's a long list. Yeah, there's a long list.
Okay, so that'll be it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
I appreciate it.